It's Mauricio Mejia live on YouTube.
All right, and today's special guest, we have Joel Brokaw that's going to be joining us, and we're going to be sharing the story of your father. And we talked a little bit before our show, and we talked about entrepreneurship, and that's actually probably one of the first times that I've heard that topic or that verbiage. I've heard of many other ones, and I got to say, you caught my attention just because I've never heard it. And your father was a great person in the Hollywood scene, and he represented some great names like Elvis, Marilyn Monroe, Barry Gordy, Clint Eastwood, and many more that I'm looking forward to having you share on the show. But before we go into all of that, I just want to kind of introduce you to our world and to our audience, and thank you for making it out here today.
Well, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. We're going to be talking about the book that you just released, Driving Marilyn, and it's a story about your father and the world that he experienced in Hollywood. And we call it Old Hollywood because a lot of the people that he represented are kind of the originals that made Hollywood what it is today.
Makes me feel old too.
Well, I mean, we're gonna dive into that. So, but before we go into that, tell me more about your family and your upbringing and stuff like that. Because I know when we talked, you shared some stuff, and I was like, okay, this is gonna be an interesting conversation.
Well, I definitely had a rather unorthodox childhood. My father, even when the time I was born in 1953, had been an agent for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was already a man of prominence. And
not just any agency, right?
With William Morris Agency.
Yes.
So he was very, very lucky that he's someone who was at the right spot at the right time.
Yes.
And that's fine. But if you don't have the ability to recognize it, and more importantly, to get creative with it, it'll pass you by.
Yeah.
So he was someone who, from I think his earliest childhood, had a spark in him, had an imagination,
had a vision.
He had a passion for life, and a lot of things kind of happened in his childhood. He had a very loving, very well-off family in upstate New York. And things just kind of started to erode for him. His father died when he was 13 years old, which is a very critical point in a child's life.
Absolutely.
And so that was one blow. And then several months later, his second oldest brother, who was someone he idolized, was in the military in the Philippines right in the start of the war, and he got caught up in the Death March of Bataan.
Wow.
And so it was like one thing after another. The stock market crash happened earlier and wiped out a lot of the family fortune. And then his mother had a heart attack. And,
you're
and
talking
all of
about early
1929.
Yeah.
Yeah. So by the early 1930s,
Yeah.
a lot of the wealth and privilege that they had diminished greatly.
Yeah.
And my father's mother's side of the family, they were in show business. So they came over in 1898 and were a Russian acrobatic dance troupe.
Okay.
And so at the time, these kind of acts were novelties on the vaudeville circuit.
Oh, yeah,
and they
yeah.
came over. They had a great career in Europe. They performed in front of a lot of the crowned heads of Europe. And but there was an opportunity waiting there. And plus the fact that they were Russian and they were also of Jewish heritage. And there was a lot of persecution going on that they wanted to get away from. So they came over and made quite a great success of themselves. Most interestingly, I found out after writing the book, my son is kind of a family historian. He dug out an old article on one of my granduncles where my granduncle mentioned that the acrobatic dance troupe was performing in San Francisco at the Orpheum Theater the exact moment when the earthquake struck.
Oh, wow.
And my great-grandfather decided at that point that he was done with performing.
Wow.
He disbanded the group. And so a lot of the children ended up continuing in show business. And one of them was my father's uncle, Johnny Hyde, who is in all the biographies and history of Marilyn Monroe, because he was the big Hollywood agent who believed in her and staked his personal reputation on it. And my father ended up getting his job at the William Morris Agency because his uncle felt so sorry for what his mother had been through and felt like they needed a break. And so my father was given this big break, and he never, ever forgot it. Yeah. He was always paying it forward.
Well, there's a quote and by David Geffen. And I was exposed to David Geffen at a very young age because he is a music mogul.
Yes.
He's he is a Hollywood mogul. And his quote is very just your father wasn't just anybody. He was a visionary. I'm going to read this because he says basically, it may have been the job for Norman Brokaw when he joined the mailroom inside of William Morris. But because of him and his vision, he paved the way for many of us. With this story, we have one more chance to learn of this great person. And that's big. David Geffen is a music mogul, Hollywood icon. And for that to be said and to just to see the way that, like you just said, paying it forward.
Yeah. Well, I think.
And I don't mean to cut you off, but, we talked about this entrepreneurship because, our show is based on entrepreneurs and all that. But the term then came into the entrepreneur.
Right.
And we're going to dive into that vision, that thought process.
Yeah. But I think the David Geffen relationship is really quite typical of my father's approach.
Wow.
And he saw talent in movie stars and performers and all of that, but he also saw talent in the staff people.
Yes.
That he worked together with. And he saw that in David Geffen very early on. And because my father was the first trainee in the West Coast William Morris Agency, and which is the breeding ground of so many Hollywood moguls, he took an interest in the mailroom was the place for people to come and kind of show if they had the right stuff.
Yeah,
they paid like slavery wages.
Yeah, it was a character builder there,
right?
And
you're sort of like, hey Mauricio, will you get my coffee for me?
Yes, yes.
I'm too big to get you coffee.
Yeah.
So anyway, so my father saw the spark in David Geffen, and my father's door was always open. And I think his philosophy in life is kindness doesn't cost anything.
That's right.
So he was kind to these people.
To yes.
And when I ever encounter anyone who worked with my father, that's the first thing that they talk about. They may talk about the great deals and all the historic things that he was a part of, but 9 out of 10 times they talk about his kindness.
Wow.
And I think that's a message that I hope that anyone reading this book will walk away with and say, can I be kinder in my daily life, in my relationships?
Amen. I agree with the statement you said that you have to be kind to everybody. Everyone is important on the team. Everyone, from the person at the front door to the person that's cleaning, to everyone is a part of that ecosystem is important. And if you give everyone the respect and you treat them humane, you get a lot further. You just see it's just the universe just kind of blesses you.
I mean, Mauricio, how many times have someone come up to you and said, Mauricio, I'll never forget the time that you told me blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And you won't probably remember that. But it said you changed my life, or you really pointed me in the right direction when I needed it.
Yes.
And as I said, in the end of the day, the relationships are really what propel us forward.
Absolutely. And that is a true testament. I know that I would not be here today if it wasn't for the relationships that I have nurtured from the past, and continue to nurture them and have the relationships today. And that's kind of how we're here today together. We're sharing our stories and able to help each other out, and by sharing the message out to the world, about what, human kindness now.
That's right.
So share with us, so mailroom begins, your father becomes in the mailroom, but it explodes to other greater things.
Well, I think what happened was my father had a really infectious spirit, and he had a kind of innocence about him as well.
Good looking father, by the way, too.
I don't know what happened to me, but
well, I wasn't making a comparison. I just said, you're a good looking father. I love the era back then too, because everyone dressed up.
Oh yeah, he was.
That was the suit, the just the glamour in the people back then.
Yeah.
I love that old school era.
Oh he was.
Yes,
he was Mr. Tailored suit and tie.
Yes,
the whole way. But I think that, as I was saying before, he had a spark about him, and I think people picked up on it. It's like, we decide within less than a split second whether we're going to like someone. We're hit with their energy.
Yes,
and so.
I hope we like each other.
We do. Absolutely. We liked each other on the phone yesterday.
On the phone yesterday. All right. Yes, I love it.
So you can you develop. You say, am I going to open up to this person?
Yes.
So my father had that working for him.
Yes.
But he also had a lot of creativity as well. And I talk about in his childhood that he, when he was in elementary school in New York, he convinced the school principal that it was a Jewish holiday and that he should get off. And then he also convinced all the other kids to take the holiday off as well. And it was a fictitious, bogus Jewish holiday.
Oh, man.
So he was like always...
The rabbi did not forgive him for that one.
And he wasn't very religious, but he saw an opportunity.
Blasphemy now. Blasphemy.
So,
oh, my goodness.
So one other thing I always say about my father was that he saw opportunities when other people saw limitations.
Wow.
And so
you're speaking my language right now. I love it. I'm connecting with your father right now.
So, the only thing that's constant in life, and certainly in the entertainment business, my father was involved in more so today, the only thing constant is change.
Right.
And change can be very threatening.
And change is inevitable.
But he always, and people sort of say, well, they say, oh, he's the last of a dying breed and they don't make him like him anymore. Well, how would he be responding to the things of today? And I said, I have no doubt that he would be transcending all of the chaos with AI and all the things that are going on that have changed his job description radically. But he just, as I said, he had a good imagination. He also had a gift of being able to see the simple truth in front of him. And I think in this day and age, especially with all the information that we're surrounded by, that it's really hard for us to see that core truth. Yeah. We're just so distracted and pulled in so many different directions. And we have our phone and we have this and the TV and the music going on all the time. And so he had that ability to see that little core idea. And Berry Gordy, who started Motown, he said,
"Yes, I was. I was like, wait, how did?" But David Geffen came out of this whole this ecosystem.
Yeah.
So
so
really quick, I wanted to just say that while you shared all this information, the first thought that came to my mind is we are drowning in information and starving for wisdom, and that's where I see that someone like your father that just is getting is seeing and understanding all the stuff that's happening in that time, where he can then just channel it and then pop off what what came out.
And so basically, what Berry Gordy said about my dad was that he knew what the client wanted before the client even realized it. So he just had that kind of, it's, a sixth sense, some kind of intuition or some kind of metaphysical ability. Yeah. And so, as I said, part of it
he could call out, "You're a star.
Right.
You're not a star."
Yeah, he could recognize it.
Yeah.
But I think that the key thing with him was that he had mentors.
Yes.
Who saw that in him and gave him free reign to do whatever he wanted. And so I tell the one story, which I love, about how my father thought he was being demoted. He was a young motion picture agent, and his boss called him into the office and said, "I want you to start something a new department on something we think is going to be called television. And so that kind of tells you what the state was like. The television set was, a little bit bigger than our iPhone, maybe about the size of an iPad at that time.
Yeah.
And nobody had them.
I think there were 13-inch screens.
If that, but people couldn't sit on the sofa. They had to stand up around it. And my father got a TV early on, but the long story short was that he had to come up with some kind of idea to jumpstart the whole thing. And so he was given that challenge, and he went home and he started making a couple lists. And one list that he made was of a lot of actors and actresses who still had a name, but maybe weren't so hot anymore.
Right.
So
some B-list, B, C-list people,
And so like Reed Hadley and people who, the big celebrities I talk about in this book are not that recognizable to the people under 50 years old, but these names are like completely blank.
Yeah, you'd be like, huh? Right. I have no idea. I mean, the reason we recognize some of these because these icons, they have become icons. Right. They became superstars.
Yeah, but like someone like Kim Novak, who was a mega star, Hitchcock movies and, just...
I actually had to look that one up, by the way. I was like, all these names, and I was like, wait, Kim Novak? I'm like...
Yeah, but she kind of walked away from the business. Yeah. And so that's kind of why in fact, they're coming out with a movie about her that will maybe remind people how important she was to the industry. But long story short, he made this list of these not quite has-been, but on their way to being has-been talent. And then he made another list of the B-movie directors who did these 10-day wonder movies that would be quick, delivered, under budget, and so on. And he put those lists together, and he came into the office, and one of his superiors said, he's signing cats and dogs, like these people are not worthy of being in our agent. And his boss said, no, let him do this. He's on to something. And that was the beginning of the first kind of comedic and dramatic filmed television series like My Little Margie and Racket Squad and all of these shows that kind of came out of that. The only thing on television at that time was like I Love Lucy had definitely broken the ice on television, but the rest of it was like bowling and wrestling. And
it's no different if we think about it. If we run parallels, today we're creating content continuously, and not all content is good content, but it's content. And if you look at what was started back then and what he was creating was you needed to create content in order to get the eyeballs to be paying attention to TV.
Right. And then
that's genius.
Absolutely.
That's genius.
So he and then he had to sort of make sure that this was an ongoing business. Yeah. And one of his clients was Loretta Young, who had a fantastic anthology television series that was very, very popular in the 1950s and 60s. But he convinced her to make the jump from the big screen to the little screen. And that was something that people who, she was an Academy Award winner and, was a top leading lady from the times of silent movies up until the 1950s. And so she said, I understand this could be a good business. I could own my own program like Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz do. And most importantly, I can see this as really a good part of my mission on a spiritual level to get one major idea in front of the American mainstream every week. Wow. So once he got her to do that, then the floodgates opened.
That's right.
About a week later, my father got a call from Barbara Stanwyck, who wanted to do the same thing. Okay. And then after that point, it wasn't a problem.
Yeah, people wanted to create content, and everyone had the next great idea.
Right.
And that's what they wanted to produce and get on it. I mean, if you think about it, you have 24 hours of continuous TV time. I mean, I don't know what it was like back then, but I'm assuming that there was certain time slots and you had to fill it in. And I mean, just the amount of content that needed to be created.
Absolutely. And it became like a real economic force for the agency as well, because there was something called packaging back then, which meant, and that started during the time of radio, where the agency represented the whole program, from all the below the line people like the directors and the writers, but also the talent. And then they also went out and found the sponsor, and then they went to the network and said, here's the whole package.
Yeah.
And so they did the same thing, and that created dynasties. Like I go into how my father built the same thing for Danny Thomas, who had so many hit programs during the 1950s and 60s.
Who was the leading director or leading producer of that era? Because you have like Jerry Bruckheimer, right? Bruckheimer, that now you have many other, you have these guys that are creating so much content for all the different networks and stuff. I mean, who at that time?
Well, Danny Thomas and Sheldon Leonard.
Okay, yeah.
If you Google them, you will see that they controlled a really substantial block of primetime television.
Right, and there wasn't that many networks back then.
Exactly.
So there was I'm sure there was probably the 2 to 3, maybe 4 networks that were, everybody started fighting for the position.
And my father put that together, because I tell a story, which I will just abbreviate here, of a performing chimpanzee that ran amok in my father's boss's office and ran up a flagpole. And Sheldon Leonard was out on the street as my father came out to see what the commotion was about. And Sheldon Leonard said, in his famous New York accent, "I didn't know the Morris office had so many different kinds of clients." And so my father got the idea to say, Danny Thomas has a new show out called Make Room for Daddy.
Okay.
Which was his sort of breakthrough on television. And they were just starting it up, and we need a comedic director.
Okay.
And nobody would have put Sheldon Leonard on the list. He was a wonderful character actor and was in It's a Wonderful Life and To Have and Have Not. But he also kind of played a lot of B-movie gangsters. But my father saw something, and that was, and again, his boss said, let's give this a chance.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. I mean,
a lot of content or a lot of shows that have been given a chance have turned out to be explosive, big money makers for these networks, and you just got to give it a chance.
That's
you
right.
just don't know what's out there, what market is out there. There's 8 billion people in today's, count on the planet here. I mean, and everyone has access to some kind of version of a media that they can watch.
Well, absolutely.
So,
I mean, but that what you're touching on here, Mauricio, is a bigger question, which is about manifestation.
Yes.
And so if it's like, if you are focused in on one thing, like I want to have these many eyeballs, or I want my book to be a bestseller, or whatever it is, then you're grasping. It's like you're almost setting a limit on terms of what you might manifest. And I think my father never had that issue. I mean, he had things he wanted to achieve in life. Right. Don't get me wrong. But he also, his attitude was, let's you and I work together and put our best minds forward and our heart into this, and let's see what comes up. Yeah. And a lot of times what he manifested for himself personally and for the world was far beyond anyone's expectation.
I think when you mentioned that right now, the first word that came to my mind was authenticity. That's what your father was projecting, was authenticity, was, again, the human side of him. And he projected that out, and people connected to that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's one story about Kim Novak that exemplifies that, which he had just recently started working with her. He was very young, and he was given the task of having to go to Europe and break up a relationship that she was, a whirlwind love romance she was having with an Italian businessman. Who went by the name of Count, but he wasn't a real aristocrat. But she had a contract. She had a movie starting up, and if she didn't come and report for that production, she might get fired.
Wow.
And be selling real estate or something.
Yeah, career ending there.
Yeah.
Career ending.
So he had to go over like a bounty hunter to Rome, knock on her door, and say, "Excuse me, you got to knock this off."
Yeah.
But
we need you back in Hollywood now.
Right.
yesterday.
And she could just kind of give him the middle finger at that. But she said that when he came, he spoke my language, she said. So he had a way of being able to understand what she was going through and be able to put the situation into perspective for her, to say, look, I'm not telling you not to live your life, but you have an obligation here. And I know you're having fun and this is wonderful, but you don't have to choose one over the other. Why don't you go back and honor your contract, and then you have more time off again?
Yes.
And so she regarded him as her big brother. And that trust is the reason why she was a client of his for the rest of his life.
Wow. I can see where that charisma, that way of handling a situation. I can connect with what you're sharing, because I was in the entertainment industry for 25 years. I was doing nightlife, concerts. I started in Los Angeles, and then I ended my career here in the Bay Area. But it was there's a sixth sense that I also have, that I think you and your father and I shared, is that we have that intuition. We can feel people's energy. We can see by their body language, their facial expressions, whether they're having a good day or a bad day. And we pick up on that, and then we adjust quickly to try to fit in that within that puzzle, and then give them the experience that we want to continue to give off, which is a good time, and it's going to be okay. And hey, let's keep moving and just adapt.
Yeah, I mean, he was an incredibly positive person.
Yeah,
and I asked a number of people who are still with us, who were his clients. I said, how did he handle adversity? Like the deal didn't go through, and he would always keep a positive spin on everything, which is, it's their loss. There's something better waiting for you. This wasn't the right deal.
Yeah. I can totally attest to that. I'm going through adversity. You kind of get to see, as long as you keep that positive mindset and you keep a strong mind, you can navigate through those moments, because there's always a reason, right? One door closes, and we've heard this is a Hollywood language right here. One door closes and 10 other ones open up for you.
That's right.
So we owe it, and if you keep that mindset going, that no will eventually be a yes down the road.
That's right. And keep in mind that when you're dealing with talent too, with even the high caliber of people who my father worked with.
Adult babysitting, by the way. It's really adult babysitting. Yeah.
And they're very insecure people.
Yeah.
Because, keep in mind that so many people that are members of the Screen Actors Guild, like, what is the percentage of people actually making a living wage as actors? It's in the single digits. And so,
even today,
we're
not just back then, but today. I mean, I have friends that are. I have a good friend of mine who's coming out on the next Al Pacino movie, but still carries on another job and shares the stories. I mean, you get the notoriety or the accolades to it, but that is a grind.
So is the phone ever going to ring again?
Yeah.
So part of his job was to be a cheerleader.
Yes.
Like to really keep the spirits up and to remind his clients that, the fact that you even need to have me in your life shows that you have accomplished something. And again, our spirit of you and I working together is, let's see, it's not what's in it for me. It's what can we do together to give you more opportunity.
That's right. It becomes, what we talked about on the phone was, it becomes a win-win situation. Everybody wins. And then when you start to get that reputation for being a team player, and where everybody gets to share in the wealth or the opportunity, people start to talk.
Right.
They start knowing that you're the deal maker, you're the rainmaker. And that's really what he became in the agency. He was the rainmaker and the visionary. And I can understand now the word entrepreneurship, because it was internal within an organization of an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think the reason why he chose the entrepreneurial as opposed to the entrepreneurial is that he felt like he had this wonderful platform.
Well, he
And,
did.
And so in other words, he was given a lot of creative reign.
Yeah.
And so he had offers to run a film studio and always turned those down. And he could have gone off and become a manager and made a lot more money with the clients that he had. But he just felt like, I have a machine here. This is the entertainment world's axis runs through this building.
That's right.
There are so many resources. There are so many ideas coming together through here.
It's Hollywood. It's Hollywood.
Right.
There's like, I always tell people there's only one Hollywood, just like there's only one Silicon Valley.
Right.
Period. That all the creative juices for Hollywood are in Hollywood. They're in Southern California.
Right.
All the creative minds for technology are here in Silicon Valley. You have other places that try to take on those, but there's only one capital for film, and that's Hollywood, and there's only one capital of tech.
So I think what he loved, again, because talent was the thing he was so passionate about. And when you're dealing with human beings, it's one thing if you are, I say that he was a salesman, but he wasn't selling hardware or shoes. He was selling flesh and bone human beings that had positive sides and negative sides, and very few of them, would qualify for sainthood.
I don't think,
but it was never boring. It was never routine.
Right. Yeah. Well, because every you're dealing with multiple personalities, either throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the year. You're dealing with multiple personalities. Now, I want to touch base. There's 4 people that really stick out of the roster that I got. Elvis. I mean, Elvis has an amazing story, and obviously his road manager, and just one of the current films that came out on Elvis on Netflix. It was interesting to see what Elvis went through. How did your dad play a role in that relationship with Elvis? My
dad was really right at the heart center of the agency, and Colonel Parker really trusted my dad. I think that they had this mutual admiration and respect that they both had kind of pulled themselves up from their bootstraps, and they were extremely different people. There's a picture of them in the book where you can look at them and say, these two men physically have absolutely nothing in common. Colonel Parker was this huge, rather obese guy that just wasn't well tailored, and there's my father impeccably dressed and diminutive with every hair in place. But they had that kind of relationship, and it was going back to that time where the handshake became really important. So there's a trust that they had. And people sort of say, well, wasn't Colonel Parker, not a nice person? And didn't he exploit Elvis and everything like that? And the analogy that I came up with, I was talking to a Canadian interviewer, and so I thought a hockey analogy would be really good. And that is that every hockey team back in the day had an enforcer. That's the rough guy, so that if the other team is picking on the star player, this guy would come over and
check him,
tell him, I don't think that's a good idea.
Check him.
So Colonel Parker was that kind of enforcer. So in other words, if he were on your team, you loved him. If you were sitting on the other side of the negotiating table, maybe you didn't love him that much.
No.
And but again, like what I found out, because my father was extremely close-lipped about his clients and made writing this book very challenging. But what I did find out from one of his associates, who was a witness to this time, was that every deal that came into the William Morris agency for Elvis had to go through my dad. And that was really a feather in his cap, because there was no one who was hotter in the 1950s and early 1960s than Elvis.
Well, I mean, again, to this day, we still talk about Elvis, and it's world renowned. Even the young people know who Elvis is.
That's right.
The other person was, again, another superstar icon, Marilyn Monroe.
That's right.
I mean, you one to the next. I mean, Marilyn is an amazing icon, from Hollywood to Washington, D.C. I mean, she traveled the world.
Well, my father was in her life in the very beginning stages, again, because my dad became the uh, her chaperone in lieu of his uncle Johnny Hyde, who was in failing health. So back in those days, the agent wasn't parked in his office with a headset by a computer screen.
Right.
They were out there on the town. They were driving to the studios, because if you didn't show an interest in your clients that way, it might be somebody else
That's right.
who would sweep in and do it. And so he loved going to the studios, and he loved being part of that world. And he had the job of taking her to her auditions, which were for $55, the SAG minimum, if she got the job, and to acting lessons and to medical appointments and you name it. He was there to kind of be her confidant. And he said that they had just a really wonderful relationship. He had such respect for her. He, even in those days, he saw the intelligence that she had. And, you know, a lot of the story specifically that I tell, which is about the moment when my father introduced her to Joe DiMaggio, you know, you look at it through today's lens of Me Too, and it kind of feels like, you know, a little bit seedy. Like it happened that William Frawley, who was in I Love Lucy, he played Fred Mertz, came over to the table at the Brown Derby when my dad and Marilyn were having a post-TV taping meal, and William Frawley was essentially pimping for Joe DiMaggio, said, "My friend Joe D wants to meet the young lady." And so
it's a form of courting people, you know.
Right. It was the sensibility at the time.
You know, times have changed. Times have changed. You know, I like some of the old school ways because it kept us sharp, kept us witty, kept us, you know, kept it fun. Now we have to watch what we say, what we do, what we, you know, because just everything can be misconstrued, and then it takes us down a rabbit hole and blah blah blah.
Yeah, well, which is, you know, one of the reasons why, if you ever ask my dad to say anything negative about a client, he would quickly change the subject or might just walk out of the room, because that was sacred for him.
Yeah,
that trust, because we all know, you know, this was before the internet and social media and everything. But if he said, well, you know, that person really is screwed up and really is not a nice person, well, you know, somebody's going to pick up the telephone and start the telephone game.
Yeah, the soundbite. The soundbite
gets back.
That's right.
Gets back and said, you know.
And when it gets back, it's already gone through so many filters that by the time the original comment was said, it comes back and it was
that's right. And so somebody would say, "Oh, I wouldn't have him as the agent because he just badmouths everybody."
Oof.
So
yeah.
So forget about, you know, asking him anything. I think that there was one chapter in the book that I wrote about Joey Bishop. Again, as somebody who a younger person would not know from Adam, but he was a member of the Rat Pack with Frank Sinatra.
Yes.
And my father put together just a load of wonderful deals for him for television series. He had a talk show that he got a deal for with ABC to go up against Carson in the mid 60s. Did a great job for him. But then suddenly just kind of, you never heard about him anymore. And
Hollywood can do that to you.
Right. But it was like, but the
it
thing,
can make you and it can break you.
But the thing about Joey Bishop was that I found out from talking to a lot of people was he pissed off a lot of people who he shouldn't have pissed off, including Frank Sinatra. And apparently he also pissed off my dad.
Yeah.
And so that's
the ego. That's the Hollywood ego kicking in.
But I never could find out. There was no one alive who could tell me what happened that soured the relationship. And I asked my father's longtime assistant, I said, did you ever talk to him about Joey Bishop? And she said, once I said to him, what happened with Joey Bishop? And he said, and this was the soundbite.
Yeah.
He was not a very nice person.
Oof. Got blacklisted.
And that was
got blacklisted in Hollywood. Yeah.
So, you know, George Raft, the great gangster actor in the 1930s and 40s. He said the people you meet on the way up are the same ones you meet on the way down.
And that's true. That's true today. That analogy goes well today. Moving on to a more current, kind of current, because I mean, I kind of grew up with the Clint Eastwood era. Clint Eastwood is another megastar that that your father represented. I mean,
right.
And I don't know if Clint Eastwood has always been here in Northern California, but the how did that kind of happen?
Well, my father signed him
Mhm.
to the agency contract and got him on Gunsmoke.
Okay.
And he
Gunsmoke was a country western.
well, it was a Western series.
There
right?
you go. Yeah.
And so he played Rowdy Gaines, and so he was like one of the ensemble members. And what happened in the agency?
I think I just dated myself or something. I was a kid. I loved cowboys, and all that.
Well,
the Western
they were
movies.
showing them in reruns for many years.
There you
so
go.
You're okay.
Yeah.
but basically, what happened in the agency? My father really wasn't day to day with him because they had a thing like how my father got Kim Novak as a client. The boss would meet with the star or the new client, and then they would match make them with someone a little bit lower down on the hierarchy because the boss is just too busy, and the boss is really about overseeing stuff.
Yeah.
And so my father did the same thing with Clint Eastwood. By time he signed him, he had already was at a place of prominence, and so he assigned him to another agent named Lenny Hershan, who ended up representing him for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
For Letty's life, and so. But the great story with Clint Eastwood was that the opposite thing was happening for TV stars who wanted to do movies, and so
that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, would you started this TV segment or this and now people that are just doing TV now want to be on the big screen,
right?
That's
so
that
was like basically forget about it,
and those are two different universes,
right? So Clint Eastwood wanted to do movies. And so lo and behold, there was an agent in their Rome office that had an offer for Clint Eastwood to do a movie in Italy. And back then, I mean, you had Fellini and Rossellini, the art house people, but the rest of it was kind of like costume dramas and togas and, lip syncing and everything.
Yeah.
So it was, it didn't have the best reputation, let's just say. And so basically, this offer came through, and Clint said, "I want to do it." And then the next thing became, can they pay? Because they had a reputation of, maybe not being able to come up with the cash. And so the person from the studio in Rome came out literally with a brown paper bag with cash in it. And one of the attorneys from the agency met him in the parking lot, gave the cash, and then Clint Eastwood went on the plane and did this movie. And then a few months later, the film cans come into the agency. They go into the screening room and they start rolling this film, and it's all in Italian. There's no subtitles, but everybody was blown away. And it was called Fistful of Dollars.
Okay.
And that was like the seminal moment in which I think it's okay for TV stars to go and do films now. Okay. Clint Eastwood broke the dam on that one.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. We talked about comedy earlier. I saw on the roster Bill Cosby.
Yes.
Is that part of when comedy started hitting TV or what?
Yes. I mean, my dad saw something really special in him, as many people did in the mid 1960s. And so he got him the job on I Spy.
Okay.
And that sort of really established Bill Cosby as a mega star.
And was it still comedy then, or the way I know Bill Cosby is as the comedian, right?
Yeah.
And
that was more of
a pioneer in comedy.
Absolutely. Yeah. He was at that time. He was doing the I Spy was a dramatic series, and it was revolutionary because it was the first time that a white actor and an African American actor were kind of equals on a television series. And it was I talk in the book about what they had to go through to get that through. A lot of the Southern network affiliates were not wanting to do that.
Yeah, I could see that during that era.
And so basically that, and then what happened was Bill Cosby had these vinyl record albums of comedy albums that sold in the millions. So he had that going on as well. And then he had commercials, and then he started doing movies, and then the Cosby Show happened. And that again created another dynasty there.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that I go to pretty great lengths to talk about this relationship for a big reason. And the big reason is that when my father passed away, a lot of the obituaries in New York Times and London Times and even in small newspapers were always sort of saying, well, was he part of the cover-up of the Bill Cosby situation?
Oh, God, yeah.
And so, and I lay out in pretty strong detail what the nature of the relationship was.
Yeah.
And my father was mercifully spared it, if you can call it that, because he was in end-stage dementia when a lot of that came through. And so it wasn't like he knew that Bill Cosby was not a saint, because there had been other infidelities and so forth that had happened, that my father had to deal with, but nothing on the scope of what the accusations were against him.
Yeah.
And so, and it was the nature of their relationship. My father was somebody who closed the big deals.
Right.
He didn't handle like, when's the plane coming into the airport and is the hotel booked and all that.
Well, there's a difference. I mean, you have the person that's closing the deals and bringing in the deals,
Right.
And then you have the handlers, the people that are hand holding these people, the road managers or the managers,
Right.
or the I guess I want to call like a sub agent, you know, or somebody that just handles that day-to-day stuff, and you can't watch and babysit people 24/7.
And I think, I think my father could not have like responded to it and said, well, it's their loss, or there's a better deal coming, or we'll get through this. The magnitude was far beyond that. And, as I said, it's the whole thing is like a Greek tragedy, because the Cosbys were a part of so many important big things, positive things in our society. Yeah. And then because of this fatal flaw, it all got kind of wiped out.
Yeah. It's interesting to see that there's still those symptoms in Hollywood today. That you would think that people are paying attention, that we're paying attention, or that they're being paid attention to. And you would think that some of those things would not be repeated, but human beings are just it's.
Well, when you achieve the kind of fame and wealth, you become a demigod.
Oof.
And what happens is you sort of feel like, well, the rules don't apply to me.
Yes.
Or
oof, I can relate. Yeah. Man, you're talking to me. No. I understand that, and especially when you don't have it, and then you have it, then it. There's a saying in business. I always tell people, money changes people.
Yeah,
it does. And we may have a conversation today, and but when you come across lump sums of large amounts of money, it does something to the mind.
Right. It's well, I usually say like whatever isn't tightly bolted down is going to fly off in your head.
Yeah. No, I've so that's why when you said that, I could see it. It becomes in athletes too. You see that as soon as they sign that big deal, all of a sudden the something shifts. So you have to be around people that you can trust, that are with good intention. And I think that's kind of where we see the kind of the downfall would happen with Elvis. I mean, he trusted, but it got to a point where who else was in that circle that, started to chip away at that.
Yeah, I think part of why this is an untold history is that we all know Elvis and Marilyn and all the people that my dad worked with, Natalie Wood and Kim Novak and so forth, but we don't know what kind of structure they had. Right. And George Slaughter, who had the show Laugh-In the late 1960s, which was the most popular television show of its era. Um, he he was a client of my dad's, and he said that my dad was an agent, a manager, an attorney, an accountant, and a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And I would also add a social worker
Yeah. All in
to
one.
that,
Yeah.
because he had to kind of he didn't get involved in people's personal lives unless there was kind of an invitation
Mm.
to do that they wanted to have some help, or they wanted to share something about what's going on with them. Or if he saw something super self-destructive and felt like it was in their enlightened self-interest to know about this. And then at that point, it becomes the ball's in their court.
Mhm.
It's like, am I willing to take a hard look at myself and help myself? Because he couldn't do that for them. So he knew, even though, you could look at Marilyn and Elvis and Natalie Wood and all these people who ended up with tragic deaths. And you can say, what did my father think about that?
Mm.
And I would say to them that he was an astute student of human nature, and he knew what was in his power
Yeah.
to help someone, and where was he helpless to help someone.
You gave me, I got chills when we talked about, when you mentioned that all the tragic deaths that happen to these icons. It just makes you wonder, right? When you're on camera, you're one person, and when you're off camera, you're something else. And then what are the dark sides that come with that fame and fortune? It's almost it's almost like a curse, and we look at it today and look at some of these mega stars or mega producers. Look what happened to Weinstein.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, all I can tell you is
Yeah.
when I was a little kid growing up,
Yeah.
and seeing it from a very limited perch,
Yeah.
it had no attraction to me because I saw a lot of miserable people.
Yes.
Like if you're on the outside and you come to Hollywood and you sort of say, wow, this is glamorous, and
Right.
this is wonderful.
Facade.
I was like
Yes.
seeing, we would have people come over the house on the weekends. My father had a swimming pool, and I was a little kid, in the San Fernando Valley, and I was hanging out in the swimming pool. But these people that were, had weekly television shows that I would watch would come over, like Nick Adams was the rebel, and Hugh O'Brien was Wyatt Earp, So I'm watching these people that I see on television, and they're like, not very pleasant people. They're trying to get into my father's favor, and they're saying insincere things, phony things to me to kind of put themselves into the good grace of my father, because I'm being nice to his kid,
Right.
and all that. So it's like kind of like,
yeah. No, well, it's part of the smoke and mirrors. It's show business.
yeah,
And you're going to do whatever it takes to get to accomplish what is it that you ultimately want to accomplish. And that's the thing about LA and Hollywood. It's people, the reputation that has gotten is that it's a facade.
well, but the thing is, if you understand and you accept
That's right.
what it is, then it comes down to what is your intention.
That's right.
And my father had an intention to help people. I say that he didn't drink.
Yeah.
He didn't do any drugs. He didn't gamble. His drug was helping people.
Yeah.
He just loved.
No bad habits, no vices.
And it was
it
wasn't like I'm helping you because I want something from you. That wasn't it. He didn't give to get. He gave because he gave unconditionally, because that's who he was. And even if there was a competitor and he heard that they were having a health crisis in the family, he would pick up the phone and call them and say, I have a doctor for your mother. And I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me and said, oh, your dad helped me out. Dick Van Dyke said about my father that he put together a lot of great deals, but he also, what I respected him the most for was being a humanitarian.
Yes, I was just going to say he was human.
Yeah.
The humanity that came out of him, and that was just ingrained in him. And that's just part of the upbringing, though, too. There was the foundation that was set as a child through his parents,
right?
Carried forward, and he was able to just amplify it and get it to where it worked and got him to where he got to. And
all that being
like,
said,
yeah.
he wasn't always the most fun father to be around.
I'm sure he was busy. You have to forgive him. You're a pretty big family, or your father.
He had 3 marriages, and we were part of the first clatch.
All right.
But he was like, and I kind of go through his childhood and all these tragedies that happened. And I think losing his father at 13, I think it kind of created an emotional gulf for him. Like he sort of said, I don't want my kids to feel the same way I felt about my dad. And so if I die, I don't want them to go through what I went through.
Absolutely.
And so he was like a little bit emotionally distant.
Mm-hmm.
He was a great dad in so many ways. If we were in trouble, boy, he was like there in a New York minute. He was there to help us, but he was like not somebody to get down on the floor and play with you.
You made a comment earlier about just Hollywood and the perception or the way it's the culture even now. And I remember I had my days in the Hollywood scene, and I remember sitting at the table with a good friend of mine, and I'm looking and I said the same thing. I said, man, this thing is just, it reeks of fakeness. And he says, yeah, he said to me, Mauricio, he goes, it doesn't matter. He goes, everyone is watching everybody right now because everybody doesn't know who everybody is or what connections you are. So everybody is going to be just that level of just self-interest. And so I remember sitting there, and it was an event at the time. It was Kim Kardashian, and she was super at her peak. It was in Hollywood. And I just remember we're there in the VIPs with the VIPs, but everyone's a VIP. But we're trying to be more exclusive. I mean, everyone is trying to one up the VIP, right? So, and then when we had that conversation, as I'm looking around the room, I'm just like, I mean, and there was other stars that were in there too. It was her event, and Paris Hilton was there. I mean, there was all kinds of Richie was there, their friend before they had their falling out. But it just was interesting just to see. And feel that environment. And, it's interesting. You go back to LA today and there's still unfortunately the movie industry, Hollywood is getting beat up right now. But the culture is still there. It's it
can be pretty superficial to put it in the most positive way possible. Yeah. But I think, again, what I realized when I transcended my prejudices from childhood and said, I want to work in this industry was that I saw a lot of good that could be accomplished.
Yes.
Because I was a publicist, and I was working with very high profile people.
Mm.
And fortunately, most of them had the intention of saying, I want to use my fame and my access to the media for educational purposes to really help uplift people.
Yeah.
And so I realized that there's an opportunity here to do a lot of good through the access to millions of people.
Absolutely.
And so you have to kind of, as I said, once you kind of set that intention for yourself, it really changes things. I mean, you can have a job you could be a cashier at the supermarket and say, oh, this is a boring job, but you're touching so many people every day and you're giving them a smile and you're giving them you're looking in their eyes, and maybe that's the only human contact that person's having that day.
Yeah.
So you have to find your purpose.
That's right. Yeah. And I think your father found his purpose and his why, and it all came together, and that's why he was able to create the magic that he was able to create. You mentioned your career. Aside from writing, I know this is not your first book. You've published other books. Your career, what path did you take, especially with having an influential father?
Well, look, I acknowledge that I have had advantages in my life, So, but what I did was when I finished college, I decided I wanted to get away from the whole thing, as opposed to like getting a job somewhere right away. So I lived in Sweden for 6 years.
Okay.
And taught English as a second language.
Okay.
And lived on a little farm, and it was
very
really
humble there.
Well, it was wonderful
Yeah.
because nobody, when I told my old friends about this book, they said, you never told us anything about this. And I said, well, that was for good reason. I wanted to get away from it. I
Yeah.
wanted to be judged for my own faults and merits and not on like, oh, Elvis and Marilyn, blah, blah, blah. So I didn't want to trade on that. And so when I came back, I think what I achieved with that moment was I had an objectivity that I didn't have before. I could see what was really incredible about the business and what I could take from my unique perspective and leverage that. So that was, my father really hated the idea that I was away. He said, you're getting close to 30 and you need to get yourself established.
Old. That's old back then. In those days, that's old.
Yeah.
Right?
But then I think once he saw how I had developed, he realized that was a good investment. And so then I was doing PR and personal management with my brothers because we realized that playing the nepotism card and being at William Morris was a lose-lose situation.
Yeah.
So we had our own company and we ended up working on a lot of similar clients that my father had, like Bill Cosby and a number of other people that we shared. And that's where we got to see the side of him, like this other side of him as being this really bright and beloved character, who we didn't see as when we were growing up.
Yeah, I mean, and when you're entrenched in it, you don't see it, but when you get to see it with a different set of lenses, you get to see it from the outside. Yeah, looking in.
My brother once said, he said, "You know something? Our father is our client,
so you better pay our bill." Hollywood can take you down many paths. It can, like I said earlier, it can make you or break you. It's there's the Boulevard of Broken Dreams, right? I mean, there's so many people that go there with big dreams and they just never happen. Is there any insight on that? I mean, aside from people, I mean, just misbehaving or just treating people wrong, that's kind of how they get blacklisted, or just...
I mean, not everyone who my father represented became a mega star. He had
just a handful, though.
Yeah,
just a handful.
Had enough, you know.
And that's a handful. I mean, I mean it like a handful. That's yeah.
But I think that part of there was a client who I wrote a book for. He had an interesting take on it. He said, you know what? It's not that you're not talented, and not that your product isn't great, but maybe it isn't right now for the marketplace.
Oof.
So it's harsh words. But,
a very gentle way of saying some harsh words. I love it.
So, I mean, why something hits and why it misses. I mean, again, it's like the thing that's so much fun about talking to you is I have no idea who's going to see this.
Yeah.
And whether anyone's going to be moved in any kind of a positive way. But you just put it out there.
Yeah.
And
agreed.
No idea.
Fun. It's a lot of things just happen because they just were meant to happen, and the way they happened and the timing. And we don't have the crystal ball to say, oh, hey, this is the right time. You just have to do it. And that's one of the books that I wrote, Decide, Commit, Execute, was based on that one, you have to make a decision, you have to commit to it and execute and stay consistent with it. I mean, if you want to be an actor, you got to stay consistent. Right. You got to practice the art of being an actor. And some people have it and some people don't. Or maybe their way of acting is not of this time, but maybe for later. It's no different than when we think about some of these big tech companies that started way early. Webvan started in the early or late 90s, early 2000s, and bankrupted. They were one of the largest, and now we get our groceries delivered from Amazon. We get our groceries to the Safeway. I mean, you got Uber, the Uber services out there. These guys were just ahead of their time, and it just wasn't ready for where we were at. Great visions. And it's the same thing with actors. I'm assuming that, there's some actors that are just not of their time, but then as they mature, they all of a sudden fall into a role. I mean, I've seen some actors. Al Pacino is one of my favorite ones. When he first, Robert De Niro is another favorite one of mine. When they first started, they were young and they were in different roles. And then as they started getting older, they became the gangsters, like or the mafia guys, or just the roles started to develop in different ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, again, you have to get your foot in the door somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think once these people had that breakthrough role,
Yes.
then they could chart their path forward.
We're experiencing that right now during the creation of all the different content that we create here, and we can see it. We can see the trends. Some things hit, some things don't, and maybe it's just again the timing. But sometimes that one video might not hit today, but in a year from now, that episode just blows up.
Yeah. I mean, there's also a funny thing that I've experienced
Right.
and I've heard from other writers as well. It's like if something comes a little bit too easy,
Yeah.
it's probably going to bomb.
Oof.
And so like two of the breakthrough things that have been really important in my life in terms of writing was I helped Tyler Perry with his first book that became a #1 New York Times bestseller. And I remember
I love Tyler Perry.
I had such trepidation about doing it.
Yeah.
Like,
his story is amazing.
I don't know if I want to do this, type of thing. And I persevered through it, and it became this gate opener for me. Mm-hmm. And even with this book, Driving Marilyn,
yes,
and
where can we find the book? I know
it's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon.
Local bookstores. But basically, I was hoping. No, this is going to sound bad. Okay. I was hoping the publisher was going to call me up during the contract time and said, you know what, we've had a change of heart and we decided we're not going forward with this. I would say, oh, thank you. And it was because I had so much anxiety, not because I had a lot of unfinished business with my dad, but it was like, I only got a short amount of material from him on tape. Mm-hmm. Almost everybody's dead. How am I going to put this story together? Mm-hmm. And so I had a lot of anxiety, and I was just hoping that it was going to fall apart.
Well, it was your therapy. It was the book was a therapeutic for you, and you accomplished it. You got it to the finish line, and now it's out.
That's right. It's cathartic.
And I've had that similar experience. My first book it took me 2 years to write my first one, and then my second, third were very short period of time. But my first one was very therapeutic for me.
Yeah.
It allowed me to get through things that it allowed me to process.
Right. Well, writing is, as I said, putting something on paper. It is just proven that your mind has to lock into it in a whole different way. It's one thing to sit there and have a thought about something, and it usually goes in your head and goes out the other side. But when you write, you really have to process.
I like that. I thought to myself, yes. And there's something about writing, actual pen to paper versus typing. I guess for me, I like to feel that scribing, I'm scribing into paper. So
absolutely.
Interesting. We can go on and on and on here, with so many, probably more Hollywood stories. Let me ask you, what are some of the things that inspired you of your father, and something that we can share with people out there as we want to continue to pay it forward? I want to end it in that spirit of your father always paying it forward. He obviously paid it forward and shared with you lots of valuable traits. What can we share with the world?
Well, again, I feel like I don't want to make it so complicated, because his ability was to be able to create an action step.
There you go.
And the action step that I hope people will take from reading this book is to invest in your relationship in a selfless way. Really try to be of service, try to be of help.
Right.
And you will find that the rewards will come. Maybe not exactly when you expect them, and maybe not in the form that you expected, but a lot of times even in a greater form.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Just as I said, invest in the relationship.
Yeah. No, I'm 100% in agreement. And myself going through life and through all the different experiences, all the different businesses, all the different things, the dreams that I continue to have. I'm a big visionary. I got big dreams and big visions. What I have learned along the way in my path is that the more that I have helped others and given to others, the blessings that have come back. I'm not looking for them to reward me back, but I've noticed and I'm very grateful of all the blessings that have continued to pour into me. And it has allowed me to continue to go through these paths, because life is life. Like we talked about earlier, it's inevitable. Change is inevitable, and change can be uncomfortable for some people. But if you start to learn how to process that, you'll adapt pretty quick.
For sure.
I want to say thank you so much for taking the time today to be here on the show and sharing the story of your father. Truly, the story and the other parts of Hollywood, the sensation, right, that comes with Hollywood that we think, but and more on the grounded level, because we were able to really just break it down on really what it comes down to, relationships.
Thank you, Mauricio.
Yes.
It really is my pleasure to be here with you. And
Yeah.
really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, good luck to the book. You can find it on Amazon, Driving Marilyn. We're excited to have been here to share it with the world, and we wish you nothing but success, and we look forward to the next book.
Thank you.
Yes.
And same to you.
Thank you so much.
Like, comment, subscribe. Mauricio Mejia live on YouTube.